podcast or looking to give your podcast a new home? Why not hire Inspire FM's dedicated recording studio? With rates starting at just £25 per booking, our podcast studio is a fully functional, acoustically treated space for up to 4 people, and it's set up and ready to use as soon as you arrive. For more information or to inquire about booking, email us at info@inspirefm.org or send us a DM on our social media accounts at InspireFM Luton.
Are you an avid bookworm? Or maybe you love books, but just struggle to find the time to read? Then you need to tune into the Book Club Show on Inspire FM with Sister Imrana, where we'll be discussing a fab selection of books with special studio guests. Join us every Tuesday morning from 10 till 11 to inspire imagination and rekindle your love for reading. Don't forget, the Book Club Show every Tuesday morning, 10 till 11 on your very own Inspire 105.1 FM. From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 6 o'clock.
Edition of Friday Night live here from Inspire FM studios in Luton. We're beaming out to the good people of Luton and surrounding areas tonight, and also to the good people of Sheffield, Nottingham, Derby, Peterborough, through our partner stations across the nation. So welcome to all of you in this special edition of Friday Night Live. We're running a new format once again this week. And of course, in the studio, I'm joined by none other than my very special co-host, Zafar Saab. Assalamu alaikum. How are you finding this amazing new setup, Zafar, first of all?
Alhamdulillah. Very tech savvy, I must say.
Very tech savvy, yeah. And listen, Zafar Saab, today's show, of course, we're doing a 1 hour special as we are for the next few weeks. And we're going to go back to our 2 hour format in a bit. We are going to be joined by a very special guest for the first part of tonight's program. Of course, we are talking all about, and the strap line is about to show it, the UK autumn budget, which the Chancellor of the Exchequer actually announced only a couple of days ago, and it has been a bombshell. The question is, how has it affected you, Zafar Saab, and also our viewers and listeners? You can talk to us on 01582 481 822. Zafar Saab, we'll get your reactions in a bit, but I do also want to welcome our guest on the program. He is a very special guest. He is Ruzwan Boota, a chartered tax advisor, and also he's worked at the top 10 global accountancy firms advising individuals and businesses on that horrible topic of tax. And let's welcome him to the studio right now and on the program Friday Night Live. Assalamu alaikum. Ruzwan, how are you?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I'm well, thanks. How are you doing, you are?
Great to, yes, we're well as well, and good to see you, and nice to see you as the tax director for I Will Solicitors. And by the way, I Will are the people that actually did my will. They did a great job, mashallah. But before we talk about wills, we're not here to talk about wills, we're here to talk about tax, which actually there are tax implications now to wills as well, and inheritance maybe that we can touch on, right? But let me ask you first of all, Ruzwan, what are your initial reactions overall to the Labour Chancellor's first budget?
To be honest, it was a budget that has been talked about for the last 3 months now, and there's been so much speculation. And we knew that there was always going to be some leaks beforehand to try and make it sound like it was going to be worse than it was. And a lot of people on the back of it were saying, oh, it wasn't that bad, but the devil is always in the detail. And when you look at the detail and you look at what has now been implemented by the Chancellor, subhanAllah, it is some very, very difficult measures that are now being brought in.
It was something along the lines of, and she said it herself in the Commons, £40 billion she wants to raise, which is massive. And so let me bring this to you. I mean, this is definitely the biggest budget that we've seen ever since records began. I mean, what were your reactions when you were when you saw what was going on, Zafar?
Well, I read through the details as much as I could, to be honest, right? And it is a bombshell, like the headline said. There's a lot of money to claw back, right, because of wasted expenditure by the previous government. and the previous government to that as well.
Mm.
It was coming. However, personally, I think it's a bombshell for somebody of my age as well in terms of inheritance tax on the wheels that you talked about. The rules have changed on inheritance tax, and also I've got, I guess, mixed feelings on the threshold for first-time buyers.
I want to
Basically,
go on to that. So we'll get all
Yeah.
the details from Ruzwan. So let's go back to Ruzwan. Ruzwan, so my first question to you specifically is on the income tax. So one thing the Labour government said is that they're not going to increase income tax for ordinary working people. Is that what we saw from the Chancellor in the budget this week?
And what you expect with politicians is that they're always going to be very, very careful with their words that they use. And yes, in terms of on the payslip, you won't see any change for working people. Yes, the bands have stayed, the thresholds have stayed the same. So what you'll find is that more people are going to get dragged into higher tax thresholds over the next few years. But in terms of take-home pay at the moment, nothing is increased. Not in terms of income tax, not in terms of national insurance contributions for employees. But what are the indirect impacts of this? So when you look at businesses being attacked through this budget, naturally will they be able to then pass on, pay rises to the employees? I think that's going to be where it's going to be difficult for.
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of people don't understand that actually, okay, fair enough, we're not going to be hit in terms of our income per se, but I think, Ruzwan Saab, I would love to know your perspective on this, and you've alluded to this, which is, well, what's going to happen? Obviously, when it comes to appraisals next year, employers aren't going to increase pay. They're more likely to offset their operating costs in terms of tax on exactly what we earn. So it is going to be kind of like a stealth tax to us, right? I mean, if we can call it that. What's your take?
Yeah, I agree. It's going to impact workers, but just indirectly, because ultimately the businesses are the ones that are going to have to pass on, to try and take on the hit. So how can they then give extra pay to the workers? It's you will find that over the next few years, pay rises becoming more and more difficult for workers.
Maybe you can help us also, Rizwan, going on to inheritance tax now as well. So maybe you can explain to us, and of course, this is right up your street at iWill as well, because that's exactly what you do. But if you can explain to us how inheritance tax worked before the budget, and then what the impact will be to inheritance tax after Rachel Reeves's budget. I'd be very curious to know what the overall impact is, because of course there's going to be people watching and listening to tonight's program that may have assets, may have property, and that they want to make sure and try to ensure as much as possible that is then passed on as much as possible to their children or rightful heirs. So back to you. What was inheritance tax and how did it work roughly before? Imagine you had a property for like worth £1 million. How better or worse off would one be before and after the tax situation this week? Back to you.
Yeah, sure. So each individual has what's called a nil rate band, which is £325,000 each, which means if you, between husband and wife, have up to £650,000 worth of assets, no inheritance tax. That gets increased up to £1 million if you own a residence as well, the home that you live in. And yes, there's a few conditions on that. But let's just assume £1 million is being backed by husband and wife. So that means that £1 million of assets, no inheritance tax liability. However, in this budget, the big change for inheritance tax is in business owners. It's absolutely seismic what's happened, because as long as I've been doing tax 15, 16 odd years now, the businesses were never exposed to inheritance tax. But now any business that's worth, well, an individual's share in a business worth more than £1 million, then actually that's no longer going to qualify for 100% relief. Now only 50% of that value will be qualifying for relief. So if I was to give an example, let's just say a business owner had sole shareholder of a business where, let's just say, £2 million. Under the previous legislation prior to the budget, that £2 million business can then just be passed on to the inheritors, no tax charge, no problem whatsoever. However, after this budget, and essentially it'll be effective from the 6th of April 2026, anyone that passes away with a business, in that case £2 million business, they would incur a £200,000 tax charge on that £2 million business. And obviously, the larger the business, the larger the tax charge. So if you think about it, not just in terms of the tax hit, but actually, how is that business and how are the inheritors going to actually even fund that tax charge? It's not like anyone's just sitting around on £200,000 just sitting there.
So
In that case, £2 million business.
that makes sense. Thank you for that very good explanation. Very clear. So what I'm hearing from you is the primary inheritance tax announcement for the autumn budget for 2024 is related. It impacts businesses more than it impacts individuals. The individual component is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So there was two key ones. The businesses was the major one, and also inheritance tax on pensions. So anyone that's built up a pension over their lives, normally
Right.
pensions, people are investing into pensions because income tax free, capital gains tax free, as well as inheritance tax free previously. However, from April 2027, that's going to be abolished, that inheritance tax protection. So if you pass away and you've got an unused pension, that's now exposed to inheritance tax. So the
That's
amount
big.
of people, yeah, it's huge.
So just to be clear on that, let's say I've got a 500k pension pot that I've been contributing to all my life. I happen to die before I'm able to leverage that pot, right? I happen to die, so there's the 500k still there. Let's just say somebody dies when they're 60, right, before they retire. So you're saying before that 500k would have been passed on to inheritors as per a normal will, but now the government will take from that pot 20% or whatever it might be.
40%.
And how much?
40%.
40%. Wow.
Well, 500k, 200k
Wow.
is now gone, leaving
Wow.
300k for the
And that
inheritors.
never used to happen before.
No.
That's phenomenal. And can I ask you about property as well? So obviously people may have property as well. The £325,000 tax-free threshold, that still stands, I'm assuming. And I'm assuming that you can pass it on to your spouse as well as before. So for example, if there's a husband and wife and they own a house, if one of them dies first, then that exemption then passes on to the living spouse. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So if you are legally married here in the UK, you can pass on assets to your spouse tax-free, inheritance tax-free specifically. Let's say while we're on that topic, so inheritance tax-free, the spouse inherits it. But the problem there is that doesn't mean you got rid of inheritance tax. So let's just say that you had £1 million in your name, you pass that on to your wife who's got £500,000 in her name. She's now got an estate of 1.5, which is exposed to 40%. So people think, oh yeah, we've saved tax, we're just passing on to the spouse. No, you haven't saved tax. You just kick the can down the road. Essentially, it's just it's delaying the inevitable of inheritance tax. And with values of properties just continuing to rise over time, that's a big problem. That's a big problem.
That's massive. Okay, well, let me go to Zafar Saab. Zafar Saab, your reactions to what you've heard so far. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a lot of what I wanted to say has been captured already. I think the pensions are the biggest shock, to be honest, right? Pensions, a lot of people sort of save that all their lives, to be honest, right? And the intention's always been that that's your safety net and the safety net for your children, etc. And that's gonna go, well, 40% of that, right, is essentially going to go to the taxman. I think from an ideological point of view as well, right, it's easy to grab money from people who pay tax, basically, right? But I think there has to be, from our ideological point of view, has to be more accountability of the people who waste money to get us into a situation where the taxman has to then, the taxpayer has to then, have to foot the bill. Ever since I can remember, there's always been raids, right, on the taxpayer, getting money from either one way or the other, etc. Never been in a situation, right, where the situation has improved, right, to the extent that taxpayer has been relieved. So I think somehow the previous mismanagement of the previous governments, etc., there ought to be some comeback for those people who just simply signed away contracts, right, for PPEs, etc., wasted public money, right, on
but that ain't going to
clothing,
happen,
etc.
is it? I mean,
Well, there has to be some sort of an accountability.
Yeah,
there has to be.
but it's ideologically, I hear what you're saying, but that's not going to happen, is it?
Well, you can make some of these things a criminal offense, right?
It's not going to happen.
Well, it's not going to
There's
happen.
certain things that are in our control, and there's certain things that are not in our control. And the thing is, the things that are not in our control, we can't do much about. But there is so much within our control that we can actually do. Number one, like we can't just sit here saying, "Oh my God, they're going to come after us now even more." Well, actually, get up and let's actually do something about it. Then let's start planning and actually trying to protect our assets from inheritance tax and other taxes. There's actually so much that can be done. It's just that unfortunately we just sit back and just don't do anything.
Ruzwan, I'm going to come to that in a second because I know we've only got around 6 more minutes of your time, and we really appreciate every moment we have with you. If you can stay with us for until 26 past, that would be really good. But if you can't, just let me know, and then we'll let you go on time. But before we go on to the planning bit, because Emrasab makes an excellent point, there should be some redress, but unlikely, especially in the way the system works. There should be some redress. Governments should not be able to come in, spend like crazy, leave black holes that are unaccounted for, and then there's a succeeding government has to pick up the scraps. That's effectively what's going on.
It's
right
the
now.
Taxpayer at the end.
Exactly, it's taxpayer at the end that has to pick it up. But I want to go on to the next bit, which is about the minimum wage and also about how that has changed as well, Ruzwan. So my understanding is that the minimum wage has increased. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, but also I want to understand the market reactions as well, because we'll remember the Kwasi Kwarteng, the Liz Truss mini budget. It was a disaster. It's what led to mortgage interest rates going through the roof. A lot of people who were on, those fixed rates that they were on for 2 years, 5 years, were reaching the end during that period. They're paying crazy interest on their mortgages if they went down that route. We're not here to talk about whether mortgages are Islamically acceptable or not. We know what the religion says about that. But nonetheless, people are on mortgages and they're paying through the roof now because of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. No doubt about that. So I'd love to know what the minimum wage is now and how that's improved, but also how the markets are reacting, because Liz Truss, the mini budget, Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget, the markets reacted very negatively. Do we see the markets responding slightly more positively? What's the reaction been? I'd love to get your take. Back to you.
Yeah, sure. So there has been an increase in the minimum wage. So for 18 to 20-year-olds, the national minimum wage will rise by £1.40 per hour. So yes, that's for a lot of people, they're going to be happy about that. But again, you have to look conversely, who's going to be paying that? It's the businesses. So you do have to look at both sides of the coin. And that just makes the strain on businesses even more. That's why the bombshell for this budget is not necessarily on working people, it's more on the business owners. The business owners are going to have to foot the bill, in all honesty, for all of this. And they're taxpayers just like you and I. It's just that they are operating a business, and it doesn't mean that they are ultra wealthy just because they're running a business. Some of them are just lifestyle businesses. But that's where it's going to happen. So yeah, national minimum wage, yes, it's positive that it's rising because the cost of living here in the UK is definitely not getting any cheaper.
And
so it's positive.
And that's really helpful. And before we go on to the financial market response and sentiment, do you reckon some businesses, because they can't afford to pay the operating costs for headcount and employees, may choose to actually make cost savings, in fact hiring less people and trying to get more with less?
Yeah, definitely. Can they really afford to keep on hiring more people? The profits are going to suffer. Can they afford to do so? And not just that they're going to suffer with profits. I can imagine a lot of businesses now going, just going to have to shut up shop because it's just too costly to operate. Not just, I know we already touched on inheritance tax, but that's going to cause businesses to close for sure. Because if someone passes away and they can't foot the bill for IHT, that's going to close. Likewise, with these increased costs on businesses, increased taxes, employer national insurance contributions is a big rise.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go on to the market response. So your analysis on how the markets have responded today post budget.
Yeah, so it's not been pleasant reading for Chancellor for sure. Gilt yields are up, and it's not looking good. Normally, that market reaction is what the Chancellor will look at straight away. They don't want it to be that the gilt yields are going up, and when already they're trying to bring inflation under control and bring interest rates down, that is not a positive thing. It was estimated at the moment the Bank of England rate is 5%. They were hoping. And it was being predicted that by the end of next year we'll be closer to 3% or 2.75%. The fact that the gilt yields are going up right now is only going to cause a problem for those predictions. It's less likely for the interest rates to come down as quick as we were hoping. So
Yeah.
again, that impacts everyone. Interest rates staying up high, that impacts everyone.
This is bad. This is
Yeah, it's
this is
not great. It's not quasi-quatting territory, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, the initial
yeah.
reaction was definitely not good. We need to have a
Yeah,
look at how it's
Kwasi
continuing
Kwarteng,
to move.
horrible guy in terms of
So,
his competence when it came to managing and reading the situation and the sentiment of the markets. And we saw the reaction then, and everyone has suffered since. Of course, I get the fact that people who are pro-Labour will be saying, well, Labour's just trying to clean up the Conservative mess, but it's a succession of governments that has led to this. And it's policy overall that has led to this, and the civil service doesn't change overall. I don't know. I'm in two minds about who to blame for this, but nonetheless, as Eversab said, we're all picking up the pieces through taxation, whether it's implicit or explicit. Let me get this last word from you, if I may, Rizwan, because I know you have to run, and that's the most important point. And I know there's been other announcements as well about fuel duty and how that's been once again frozen, so we're not going to be paying more tax at the pump. I know that private schools are going to be paying VAT now, and there's no more VAT relief for private schools. That impacts me. I'm not loaded. I've been scraping away to try and save and send my kids to an independent school. I'm going to have to pay more because I'm sure my school is going to pass it on to the parents in some way. Lots there, but planning. If we can get a couple of minutes of your time just on planning and how can people best navigate the current taxation situation and budget situation so that it's in their and their family's best interest. What do they need to do to make sure that despite some of these changes, that things land as favorably as possible for them?
exactly. My first point would be is that within our community, we need to become more educated around financial literacy, taxation. It's not just relying on your accountant thinking that he will deal with it all for you. Accountants, yes, they know their way around tax to a certain degree, but not enough to be able to do real value add tax planning. You really need to read more, learn more, because just sitting back and just staying stagnant or burying your head in the sand just isn't going to cut it. So yes, is there tax planning opportunities? Of course there is, but it comes down to who's the client and what's the makeup of the client. If they're a business owner, 100% they need to be thinking about succession planning opportunities and how to protect their business. They need to be planning a lot more ahead of time. Masha, you started off the show by talking about how you had your will in place through I will solicitors. That's something that everyone should be doing, not just from a business perspective on protecting assets, but actually from a religious perspective, we should be doing it anyways. And finally, and probably just as important, is actually protecting our families, because the amount of people that I've seen dying without a will or dying without a plan in terms of who's going to run the business, it just tears families apart. So people that those taboo topics or those difficult conversations that our community have been so reluctant to have, we really need to stop burying our heads in the sand and actually start having those difficult conversations. If we just ignore it and hope it will go away, just know that it's not. If you look at the last 10-15 years, where has tax been going? Just like Safa was saying that it's only going in one way, that more and more tax becoming harder and harder and harder. Then actually we need to get up and do something, not rather than just pointing the finger at them. There are things that we can do, and there's so many things for business owners. Like I said, succession planning, speak to a tax advisor. Yes, of course I can assist through I will solicitors.
I think
Speak
that's
to your
important
accountant as well.
Yeah, and Rizwan, sorry to interrupt you because we're running out of time, but I think my takeaway from what you've just said, apart from pitching your company, is making sure that if people have a considerable amount of asset, if you own an asset that's sizable that you think people are going to argue over once you're gone, don't feel you may not live forever. People die suddenly in their sleep. it's really important to tie that camel and make sure that you've got a plan in place. And if you've got considerable amounts of assets, you know, I think it's really important, and I'm speaking from personal experience, to get financial advice. No matter how much research that you do online or through friends that you speak to saying, I did this or I did that, you need to have a tax advisor sit down with you who understands exactly what you own, what your liabilities are, where what your wishes are, so that they can configure a structure that's ideal for you. You were nodding your head. Go for it.
I 100% agree, because it's something I say with clients quite jokingly sometimes, that a lot of our tax advice, unfortunately for our community, has come through just front room talk. You know, everyone just sitting around having some chat saying, yeah, you know, you should do this, you should do that. But it's just headline figures, and no one actually knows where it's the best thing for them, because everyone's scenario is different.
Well, listen,
And the
Rizwan,
only way
we're
to
out
do
of time.
that-
Listen, I'm really great. First of all, I know Zafar Sab and I are very grateful for your time. So are the viewers and listeners of Inspire FM and Friday Night Live. And of course, we're going out through Unity FM and Link FM as well on the radio. Hopefully we can have you again just to talk about wills, and maybe we can have some other will providers as well from the different areas, just to give us more insights in terms of how best to plan for your will. But Ruzwan Boota, Tax Director for iWill Solicitors, we're very grateful for your time. Jazakallah khair for joining us.
Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Take care. Listeners, this is Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Balsa. We're going to be taking a short break. Was Zafar, your quick reactions to that conversation in 10, 20 seconds?
Lots to think about, lots to plan, I think, really. I'll be, I think.
Have you got a will yourself? Have you planned?
I do have a will, right? But I'm going to have a revisit of it, to be honest, just to make sure that
a refresh,
all of my earnings, right, are put, you know, given to my rightful heirs in the best possible way.
Don't forget me, of course, your co-host, you know.
Absolutely.
All right. Anyway, listeners, we're going to be taking...
work both ways, really, couldn't it?
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back after these messages to talk about the American elections. Don't go away.
Assalamu alaikum. In Luton and its surrounding areas, it is now time for Salat al-Isha.
लुटन और इसके मज़ाफ़ात में नमाज इशा का वक्त हुआ चाहता है.
This azan has been sponsored by Ideal Properties. Contact us on 01582 721110 or log on to www.idealpropertiesltd.co.uk.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد.
Would you like to sponsor the Azan? If so, give us a call on 01582 481 810 or email us on info@inspirefm.org.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 6:30.
Of Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal Sab. Of course, we're beaming out to the good people of Luton and surrounding areas tonight, and also to the good people of Sheffield, Nottingham, Derby, Peterborough, and nationally and internationally through our partner stations across the UK. Of course, we are looking at the new format for Friday Night Live, which is beaming out live as well on YouTube and Facebook. So if you do want to watch myself and Zafar Saab, you can do so by going online as well onto YouTube and typing in Inspire FM Luton and clicking on the live tab to go through this program live as well. And of course, brand new format, Zafar Saab. What do you reckon? Are you enjoying this? First of all, we've got Canary Wharf for the back, which is a good start.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Canary Wharf,
Docklands.
yeah. Yes, it's. I guess it's going to take a bit of time, right, to get used to this new format.
Oh, is it?
It is bang up to date. It's.
I always said you were a slow learner.
Well, it's my age type of thing, So, I'm not used to the new technology as such, basically. Yeah, but yeah, it looks good.
What do you mean? 75 is the new 25? Don't.
Okay. Fair enough.
All right. Well, listen, I've got to say, lots of things going on in the world, and of course, on Friday Night Live, we have been covering lots of topics. We cover normally the Gaza topic and the Israel topic and what's happening in Lebanon. This week, because we're on a 1-hour format, we want to cover another topic that I think is also quite pertinent in terms of impact to the world, and that is the US elections, which are happening on Tuesday next week, so 5th of November.
5th of November, that's right.
And it's not gunpowder, treason, and plot. This is another kind of plot, which is the US elections, right?
Well, with Trump, you never know.
There could be gunpowder. There could be treason.
There could be gunpowder.
It could be, pardoning himself.
The cavalry and all sorts of different things, to be honest.
Part of me wants Trump to win just to see him pardon himself. That'll be quite exciting. But listen, I'm excited, and we've got to be careful that we're impartial here, because we don't want to be sued for $10 billion. As has been the case with CBS and the Trump administration.
Or even a bigger sum, right, for Google.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, entire world's GDP. How about that, right?
Exactly.
Dangerous stuff. Anyway, we're going to go on to the US elections. Of course, it is Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. And this is quite serious, listeners and viewers, because we do know that the outcome of American elections does affect how we operate in the UK, how we operate in the world, the security of the world, NATO, the United Nations. So that's why we care about it on Friday Night Live, and that's why we think you should care about it as well. And guess what? Two other people that care about this particular topic are Dr. Chris Featherstone and also David Frank, joining me right now. So let me first of all introduce Dr. Chris, who's an associate lecturer in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of York. He's published on foreign policy and decision-making, and his current research builds on this, focusing on UK foreign policy decision-making structures and the Trump administration. So welcome back, Dr. Featherstone. Delighted to have you. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm very well, thank you. as I'm a massive American politics nerd, I'm obviously excited at this kind of time of year. It's very interesting.
Absolutely. And one other American politics nerd to mention is another chap who's been on this program many times. We love having him on this program. And he is none other than David Frank. He's professor of rhetoric and political communication at the University of Oregon. Good evening, Professor Frank. How are you?
I'm scared. Next Tuesday will be a moment that will spell the future for us. And so I'm really eager to talk with you and Chris about the events that are taking place right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you're scared, and you know what? I guess that kind of reveals what side of the equation you're on, maybe to some degree, because it is looking neck and neck. And I've got to say that when Kamala Harris, of course, was announced as the running candidate for the Democrats, it looked as though she had a lot of momentum post that event, and that has slowly sort of started to die down, and it's looking really strongly like the Trump administration to be potentially has much more momentum than anyone was expecting. So let's start with you, Dr. Featherstone, your reactions to that. And is there any substance to the claim that the Trump camp does have more momentum?
Well, I think until about a week ago, I would have been very confident in saying not really the momentum on the side of Trump. Trump has essentially maintained the momentum he's already had, but hasn't necessarily developed anything new. He has maintained the support base that he was already working with. Recently, however, Trump has done fairly well with new groups. I think the risk of President Biden getting involved, unfortunately, it came to pass, and his garbage comments have been taken and have played well with the base that Trump is working with. So I think he is working with the momentum at the moment, and unfortunately, it's Harris who is trying to react to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Professor Frank, your reactions to the claims that the Trump, camp is actually doing better than expected. Of course, we've seen that. I thought it was quite an amazing event, the Madison Square Garden event in, center of New York City. I thought it was quite bold. Nobody really expects Trump to win New York as, an electoral college vote. But nonetheless, it does seem as though it was a very bold statement. It was an all-star cast. Of course, there was that comment that the comedian made about Puerto Rico, as Dr. Featherstone mentioned. But your reactions, it just seems like the Trump camp seems even more emboldened of late.
I agree in general with what Chris has shared with your audience. I would go further and say that whatever observations that you are offering are based in part on polls. And the polls in the United States right now are indicating that it is a tie. And I don't think that status has changed. If anything has changed, it's that at one time when pollsters were asking Americans about how they were going to vote, they would receive about a 25 to 30% response rate. They are now down to a 3% response rate. And so pollsters are making a host of adjustments to their measurements. And so the consensus of the evidence suggests that in the 7 swing states, it's essentially a tie. I think at the same time, there are 2 groups that are responding well to the Harris campaign. The first would be women. And if Harris wins this election, it will be due to the fact that women are outraged by the abortion decision handed down by the Supreme Court and by the blatant misogyny exhibited by Trump more generally and in particular at the Madison Square Garden event. And so I would be very careful to make generalizations about momentum right now, because I think that the election is now a tie, and I think it'll remain a tie Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday of next week. We may not know the result for some time.
Yeah. That's interesting. And Zefra, your analysis on this, because obviously both sides are going to say they have momentum, right? Regardless of the fact that the data is showing, the polls are showing that it is a 50-50 point, as Professor Frank mentioned. But I would argue that it is worrying that the Trump camp feels looks as though it's more emboldened. I mean, this Madison Square Garden event they had, I watched it live, not all of it, it was just too long. I watched the highlights, I was watching points of it live. It was a very impressive event.
I think in terms of momentum, like it's been said, right, the Trump campaign has maintained the support base it's had, and they're confident that that support base is going to get them through. Kamala, like you said, it's been up and down, but the key thing is if it's a tie, like it's been suggesting it's a tie, are we going to see the repeat of what happened in the last elections, where Trump doesn't accept the outcome, right? And when we get into the gunpowder situation, which you mentioned earlier on,
the gunpowder treason and plots, yes,
right.
It is the 5th of November,
and his supporters and his supporters are ideological, right? And if they come out, right, then we may have some instability in US, and it'll be interesting if Elon, right, tweets that civil war is coming or something on those lines, which he did in the UK elections.
Absolutely. Will he interfere? Well, he is kind of, it could be argued he is interfering with US elections with the $1 million draws that he's doing, handouts or draws or whatever he's doing. It's a very clever ploy. Of course, it went to court. Both of you gents will know it went to court, and currently the court has said he can carry on, which is quite interesting as well, and quite dramatic. There's never, I think, a Trump moment that isn't quite newsworthy and exciting and quite entertaining to watch. But even Elon involved, who's a horribly uncharismatic speaker, but nonetheless he happens to be the richest man in the world, so he carries some clout there. But I want to touch on Dr. Featherstone and Professor Frank on the black vote, because over the last week, a lot of the news outlets in the US and even in the UK have been showing a lot of black voters not really convinced by Kamala Harris that are actually thinking of voting for Trump. Dr. Featherstone, your reactions to this and your analysis?
Well, I think that is true. It's interesting to see this polling coming through, and as with any American election, we get the kind of vox pops and we get the kind of interviews with people on the street, which aren't necessarily representative but are interesting and show us a bit more on the ground as external viewers. It's an interesting thing to see. I think, as David has highlighted, amongst women and black women, Kamala Harris is doing far better than she is with black men. And it's been a key point for the Harris campaign to try and reach out to the black male vote. That has been working relatively well, but we don't really have enough information to see how that has been going. We've seen the rallies, we've seen the speakers, we've seen people coming out trying to get it going, but we do not yet know how effective that has been. And I don't think we will until well past the election date. You are right, though, that this is an interesting one, and actually something a little bit unexpected. The Biden administration, the Biden campaign did very well with black voters. And actually, it's interesting that Kamala has actually not been able to maintain that to the same degree as we may have expected.
It's really surprising. And Professor Frank, before I come to you for your reactions on this, let me add to the equation the Arab vote as well. I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of Arab/Muslim voters that are actually thinking of voting Republican and Trump versus, Kamala Harris and Democratic. So what's your analysis on that? What's going on there? Is this more marketing than reality, or is it actually happening on the ground?
Well, first, I want to affirm what Chris said about the black vote. And again, we can't group all blacks under one category because, as Chris noted, women are voting for Harris at the same percentages as they voted for Biden. And I would say college-educated blacks are also voting for Harris at the same rate as others as well for Harris. The working class blacks have, I think, fallen to the argument or have been persuaded by the arguments offered by Trump. You bring up a very important point about Arab Americans, and I would like to isolate Michigan as an example. There are 300,000 Arab Americans that vote in the state of Michigan, and the most recent polls indicate that they are split between Harris and Trump in their preferences. And it is primarily because of America's stance on the Gaza situation. Many Arab Americans, as I am as well, are horrified by the Biden embrace, unrestricted embrace of Israel. And some 100,000 Arab Americans decided to cast no comment or no commitment votes during the Democratic primary, as well as some other non-Arab Americans. And so the Arab American population in Michigan very well may spell the defeat of Harris if Harris does lose Michigan. And that should be an audience that would naturally go, that has in the past naturally gone in the direction of voting for the Democrats.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Zefir, it is quite surprising how a lot of the Arab vote is split, and it is to do with Gaza.
It is, and I think if you look at the UK elections were split as well. The Muslim community was split, because of the different. Well, ultimately, the response from both candidates is the same, so it's not much of a choice, to be honest. And I've also heard that some portions of the Muslim vote have decided they're going to vote for a third candidate.
Yeah.
Again, that's a wasted vote in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult situation for our Arab and Muslim voters because they don't really have a choice at the end of the day in regards to that one fundamental issue, which is pertinent to all, right, which is Gaza.
Yeah.
Because the policies are the same. But in my opinion, right, if I was to sort of give an opinion, I would think that Kamala will not be able to handle Netanyahu, because she doesn't have the experience, I guess, to handle somebody like that. Trump may well basically force his will on Netanyahu, and I think some commentators are probably betting that he'll maybe be able to rein in Netanyahu better than Kamala, and that's why you're seeing a bit of a split. Ideologically, I think they will be tempted to go for Kamala, but pragmatically, they might go for Trump on the basis that there might be some positive that he may be able to bring.
That's a really interesting analysis, and let me take that back to our guests on the line, because it does touch on the international relations aspect of whoever is the next president and how much clout effectively they'll have, not just on the Gaza situation, but also on the international situation with climate control and things along those lines. Dr. Featherstone, your take, who do you think would be more, statesman or stateswoman like, and who will have that clout? I mean, Trump has demonstrated that already. He has a track record, like him or loathe him. He has been able to have some quote unquote impact in that arena. Your take?
Well, that's absolutely true. Trump has shown himself to have a presence on the world stage. Whether that was for the good of America, for the good of the world, that is a very different question. But as you said previously, news attaches to Trump. Trump gets a lot of attention, especially on the international arena, because he is such a big character. I think in terms of the ability to project presence in the international arena, you're absolutely right that Trump will have a certain level of involvement, but from what he's already said, it is unlikely to be something that will build US relationships. He has already indicated that he would be interested in negotiating a peace deal over Ukraine with no involvement from Kyiv. So that would be a very interesting approach and not one welcomed by much of Europe and especially Ukraine. When it comes to Israel-Gaza, I think the situation is even worse, unfortunately. Trump has said that he would wish to speak to Netanyahu, but he has also indicated that he would tell Netanyahu to do what he has to do, essentially giving a complete green light to genocide, which I think is just obviously utterly unacceptable, but is also an even greater exacerbation of what we've seen with Biden. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is less experienced on the international stage, but is also more likely to be a softer version of Biden, but maybe less effective, as has been noted. I think she would maybe be more normal in terms of the conduct of US foreign policy, more predictable, and I think that would probably be her greatest advantage, right? That in international negotiations, Trump is such an unpredictable character that actually people are trying to react to him, not to the negotiations they're trying to deal with. And I think that's arguably going to cause more problems than it would solve. Whereas Harris is unlikely to actually solve issues, but would at least try. Yeah,
makes sense. I want to go to Professor Frank reacting to what you just said there, Dr. Featherstone, which is about it touches on your realm of expertise, Professor Frank, which is rhetoric. I mean, Trump comes out with a lot of rhetoric, and it could be. I mean, my theory here, and it's probably a wrong one, which is he could be just saying that he's going to give Netanyahu a green light to do whatever he wants now, but post-election, if he were to win, he may have a very serious conversation and say, listen, this needs to stop, because Trump wants to look good. We know he likes to look good on the world stage and take the credit for that. So could it be the case that he does actually have a serious conversation with Netanyahu and the far-right Israeli government and say, listen, guys, I need to look good now, and this needs to stop, and you need to make it happen? What's your take on that potential scenario?
Those are tempting observations, but if I were to talk with the Arab community in Michigan, I would encourage them to vote for Harris. I would do so because the Democratic Party is now split, and there are those that advocate in favor of Palestinian rights and human rights and want to make the claim, which is, I think, it's substantiated, that Israel is an apartheid state, and there are those in the Democrat Party that disagree. The Republican Party, however, is lockstep behind Israel, and especially the evangelical Christians. And so if there's any hope for a more humane approach to the Palestinian issue, it is Harris's. I think there is also a direct line between Trump's embrace of the Abraham Accords and October 7th, because there's clear evidence that Hamas understood that the Palestinian issue was falling off the agenda, that the Saudis and the other Arab states were not going to pay attention to them, and that the condition of the Palestinians would still remain tragic and horrific. And so I have no hope at all that Trump would engage in a coherent foreign policy. My hope, and maybe it's a slender hope, is that Harris will listen to, especially the younger generation of Democrats who are demanding that the administration do something to stop the genocide in Gaza. Now, I am in Oregon. I'm 7,000 miles away from Gaza. And during the spring, we had 70 tents out in front of our administration at the University of Oregon with students from Portland, Oregon, and from Washington State protesting against the genocide against the folks in Gaza. And the students were very well informed. They were talking about the destruction of 7 universities in Gaza and the 40,000 men, women, and children who've died in Gaza. And so I do not think that there's a very good case to be made for Trump, because Trump's foreign policy, it goes under the guise of America first, but it's really Trump first. Anything that benefits him, he will do. And that's not a good way to make a judgment about the world. I think the world needs a president that will listen to different advisors, different evidence. And I could certainly talk about Philip Gordon, who will be her national security advisor, and his view of the Middle East. But I'll fall silent now.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. And last question to both of you, because we're running out of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I do want to go on to the excellent point that Zafar Saab made earlier, which is it is looking neck and neck, and the chances of history repeating itself. That is the capital rights that we saw, and Trump not willing to accept defeat if it is on a knife edge. Dr. Featherstone, Professor Frank, do you reckon we're going to see history repeating itself if Trump loses?
I do, actually. I would genuinely say I think it's possible. Unfortunately for us in the UK, I would see some of Trump's allegations around foreign interference from the Labour Party, Labour activists in the US, which is a relatively normal feature of US elections and has been for 30, 40 years now. It's nothing new, it's just new to Trump. Trump didn't know it happened, and therefore it's brand new. But yes, I would see that as potentially a route for his potential allegations and case. I would be surprised if he would accept the consequences of his actions, and I would be very surprised if he was willing to accept a loss. I think what complicates it this time is it is incredibly likely that this will take many days and there will be many recounts because of just how close this election will be. So I think it's a very scary time.
Professor Frank, your take.
Two quick comments. First, the Democrat Party is prepared. They learned from the last election. And so they've marshaled some of the best legal minds to deal with the complaints that may be forthcoming if Harris does eke out a win. Second, I think that there will be scattered violent protests, but I do not think that the majority of those who vote for Trump will be willing to take up arms. I do not think that we will be in a civil war. I do think that there will be protesters representing the MAGA movement at different state capitals. And I also think that they will be under the surveillance of the police and other military that are bound to enforce the law. And so that's my hope and that's my prediction. And I hope that I'm right.
Absolutely. Me too. Yeah, indeed. Well, listen, I want to go ahead and thank both of you for joining us and sharing your perspectives. Whatever happens, I think next Tuesday, it is going to be fireworks and all very, very interesting that evening. And I'm sure we're all going to be up at night here in the UK and watching the news and seeing how it all unfolds. And those electoral college votes come in, and I could hear a massive sigh there from Dr. Featherstone as well. Let's see if history repeats itself or not. It is going to be interesting nonetheless. And let's see it pan out. Hopefully we can have you gents back to give you analysis on what happens next, depending on who's in power. But from both of you, thanks for joining us once again on Friday Night Live. Take care.
Thanks for the invitation.
Appreciate your time. Well, listeners, this has been Friday Night Live with me, Zafar Saab, and also our guests. A wonderful discussion there, Zafar Saab, with our guests.
What wonderful indeed. Very detailed, very knowledgeable.
Your predictions for what's going to happen on Tuesday next week?
You know, I think Trump is going to do it, to be honest, right? But I
really? You think Trump? Yeah.
But I don't think he should do it.
Yeah.
Personally, I think Kamala should. She can be molded, I guess. But Trump is going to be a disaster, to be honest.
It's going to be a big challenge. Anyway, we reached the end of tonight's program, our 1 hour special, and we're going to be doing this for the next few weeks. But thank you all for tuning in and joining us live. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.